Hey everyone, excited to be speaking to you again today. Just wanted to continue our story about Jesus. So last week we talked about Jesus' death and kind of talked about the Good Friday story. So this week we will be talking about Easter. To do that, I will be in the character of Peter, one of Jesus' disciples. So I'm going to go ahead and put that on right now, and then we'll kind of hear his perspective on or at least my interpretation of his perspective on seeing the resurrection happen. Okay, I'll be with you guys soon. Hi, I'm Peter, one of Jesus' disciples. Last week, I think my friend John told you about what it was like to see Jesus die. And I want to carry that story forward for you guys. You see, the night that Jesus was betrayed, most of us disciples scattered. We didn't want to be captured when they started rounding up Jesus' disciples. After all, Jesus had just been teaching us that we would face persecution for being his followers. Now, I was actually a little bit bolder than most of the other disciples, so I decided to follow the group that arrested Jesus at a distance so they wouldn't really see me or know who I was. But the problem is when I got to the place where Jesus was on trial, they figured me out pretty quickly because it was pretty clear that I was from Galilee, not from Jerusalem. I had an accent. But at that point, I got scared and I denied that I had ever even known Jesus. And that it was just a coincidence that some guy from Galilee, like Jesus, was hanging out in the middle of the night next to a place where Jesus was on trial. I'm sure I was a convincing liar to everyone, but probably not. But at any rate, when the rooster crowed, I realized what I had done in denying Jesus 3 times. I was really sad that I had done it, and I also realized that I could get caught really easily. So I went away and cried, and I was honestly, I was just broken because I had spent 3 years following this person, and here I was denying that I had even known him. I was just so scared. And then the next day, um, the disciples and I decided to try to hide in the city and to stay in contact with each other to see what would happen. We didn't want to show up among the crowds. And then we heard that Jesus was crucified and that he was killed. So we decided that the best thing that we could do then might be just to kind of lay low and not try to escape the city for a few days because people might be watching to see if we're going to leave. So we decided to keep in contact and have a few people that were kind of our safe people that we thought wouldn't get arrested to go out and into the world and kind of help us find out information and figure out what we should do. But honestly, we were mostly just sad, confused, and anxious for those days. There was the regret of spending years following someone who we thought was the Messiah, only to hear that he's dead. Now, I know some of you might remember that Jesus predicted his death and resurrection, so you might think that we could have seen that it was coming that Jesus would rise from the dead, like that we would have just been expecting it. But actually, we didn't. For one, if you'll remember me, I was actually against this whole dying and rising plan from the beginning. I didn't like the idea of Jesus dying. In fact, when Jesus first predicted his own death, I told him like not to do it. And then Jesus turned around and called me Satan and said that I was getting in God's way for telling him not to. So at that point, I kind of changed tack and I just decided to stop asking questions about this whole dying and rising from the dead thing. I didn't understand what he could possibly really mean by it. After all, Jesus almost always taught in parables. So I assumed that whatever Jesus was talking about must have been some parable, not that he would literally die and then rise from the dead 3 days later. Because basically, no one rises from the dead, right? So why would I expect that? Why wouldn't it just be a parable like everything else was a parable? But then on Sunday after the death, some women who had followed Jesus went to go to the tomb because they were some of our safe people, right? Nobody considered women enough of a threat in our culture to actually rebel. So they could follow Jesus more freely than we could. They weren't going to be arrested. Basically, the sexism of our cultural leaders was a huge lifeline for us. We could have never found out what was going on if they weren't sexist enough to not consider women a threat. But at any rate, all they were really doing was just they were going to make sure that Jesus was properly buried because it'd been all a rush to get it done before the Sabbath day to make sure that we wouldn't do work on the Sabbath when they were burying him on Friday. But when they got to the tomb, they found that the stone had been used to seal up Jesus's body, that was sitting to the side. It was already opened. And then there was no body inside. Like the body of Jesus was just gone. And instead of a body, there was an angel who explained to the woman that Jesus had risen from the dead like he predicted. That when Jesus said that he would rise from the dead in 3 days, he actually just meant that literally. It wasn't a parable. Jesus actually was alive and is alive. So, as you might imagine, that got them both excited and confused. They weren't really sure what was going on, so they came back and reported to us what they had heard. So immediately I ran. I ran to see the tomb for myself. I wasn't really as worried about being seen by the authorities anymore. That was out of my mind because I wanted to know, is Jesus alive? Is he really risen from the dead? And I got there, and all I could see was the cloths that his body had been wrapped in. The angels that they spoke to, they were gone. It was just this tomb. So I knew it was the right tomb because I knew, like, okay, yes, these are the cloths that we had I buried him in, and yes, they are bloody, like they're the cloths that were on Jesus's body, but there was no body. And so I wasn't sure what to think because people don't normally rise from the dead. Jesus had, of course, always been special, so I thought that maybe what the women were telling me might actually be true. But I was also not sure why I didn't see the angel because I'm Peter. If anyone should be seeing the angels, it should be me, Peter, Jesus' disciple. But when we got back to the disciples, or when I got back to the disciples, Jesus came and appeared to all of us. And so then there was no mistaking that Jesus had actually risen from the dead because he was standing there in front of us. We saw him. We saw the wounds that he received on the cross and how he was still scarred from that. So that left us in no doubt that he was really risen from the dead. And then add in the fact that he ate some food just to prove that he was not a ghost, and we realized that he is the real deal. So it's obviously pretty hard to explain what we were feeling and thinking at first because we were excited that Jesus was alive, obviously, just super happy, right? Our fears and our anxieties, those were gone. But we also were not expecting it, and we did not know what would come next. We had no idea. I mean, what we thought initially was that now that Jesus had come back from the dead, well, we could easily convince people to follow him and go overthrow Rome. It should be pretty easy. I mean, all you have to do is show people that the leader has risen from the dead, and I would think everyone's going to follow. So, as far as I was concerned, Jesus' resurrection was just an acceleration of the plans we had all along to overthrow Rome. And as a leading disciple, I was going to be the second most powerful man in the world. Of course, as long as Jesus overlooks that I just denied him 3 times, like, 3 days ago or so. But it's clear to me that whatever's going on with Jesus rising from the dead, that this resurrection is part of God's plan for his people and his plan to restore the blessings of Abraham and the blessings in the Garden of Eden. But I just didn't understand how that was going to work out. I was right that it was a part of his plan, but wrong about what that plan was. Because as Jesus keeps talking to us about what his resurrection actually means, we discover that he's not planning to take over Jerusalem and then start a march on Rome to set up a new Jewish empire in place of Caesar's empire. Because it turns out that the blessings that God wants to give us are actually better than the blessings of being part of the ruling empire. Instead, Jesus' resurrection reversed all of Adam's curse. Death itself was defeated. Not just the Roman Empire. And how big and scary can an empire really be if death itself is not the final word? Our ability to know that we will live beyond our physical death means that no empire in the world can really control us because we have no reason to fear. And our mission isn't a mission of military conquest. It's to teach other people about how they can also come to know who Jesus is and to know that Jesus is resurrected. It's to declare victory over death. Satan's empire is crumbling. Rome is small potatoes compared to that. Sin has been paid for. So there is freedom for all of those enslaved to sin in Satan's empire. All we have to tell people to do now is just that they should go walk free. So what we got to do is just tell other people that they can follow the teachings of Jesus and that they can choose to place their trust in Jesus. That gives them the same confidence that they will also have victory over death one day. And it teaches them what it's like to be a true citizen of the kingdom. It's also the way that God has chosen to fulfill his promises to his people. All right, so now I just want us to discuss a few questions from that relatively short story from Peter. The questions that I want us to talk about is just first, what would you have thought if you saw Jesus risen from the dead? Second one, how does Jesus rising from the dead start to fulfill all the promises that have been going on in the story up till now? The promises of everything that God was going to do. Third, what do you think your mission is based on the fact that Jesus rose from the dead? Number 4 is just, does the coronavirus make Jesus rising from the dead seem more important to you? And then number 5, and this is important especially if you've never made a decision to do this before, but do you want to put your trust in Jesus like Peter did? Do you want to choose to follow him and trust that he is the answer to sin and the answer to death and the answer to getting free from Satan? So those are our questions, and we'll discuss them in the Zoom, so you guys can jump in on the Zoom. You should see the link below, and I look forward to seeing you in discussion. Talk to you later, guys. Bye.